Hey.
Hello, hello, since we are live.
Yeah, hi everyone. How are you doing?
Fantastic. Here we are. How are you doing, sweet Alba?
Well, actually, really nice day in the Netherlands, sunny day. So I'm really happy. And you?
Seems to be a good day. Sunny day in the Netherlands, and now we have Storyblok community chats too. It seems like the community word is hard today.
Yeah, it's really difficult for an Spanish person, I will say the same. Yeah, community.
We can call it the Spanish edition also. I know Varun is here. Shh, don't say Spanish.
But actually, I was thinking maybe we can see who is in the chat and welcome them. Maybe someone can share the city where they are listening to us. That will be cool.
That's really cool. Really cool idea. Yeah, maybe we can start with some introductions in the meanwhile, so people don't have to wait very much.
Yeah,
And
for sure.
people will be joining. Because actually we are in the Storyblok community chats. So what is this, Alba? Do you know about it? Or let's say a few words.
Well, actually, I can explain what I understand about community chats, and it's like having a live stream with someone from the community, in this case, a storybook that is like a really huge project in the community, and we know and love Storybook. So I guess that is talking about cool things that are happening in the open source ecosystem. Could be that thing.
I think that's pretty accurate, and you pronounce a storybook perfectly, I guess. Which
I'm trying to. Yeah.
we have a lot of internal jokes with Storyblok, Storybook, Storyblocks, Storybox, Story. Yeah, we have many names for that, and people always confuse us. But we are good. We have a good split, let's say, and yeah, there are two different teams. Actually, I said that in the Viva Amsterdam conference, and Jan from Varun's team like posted that tweet, like, people, this is the thing, this is the balance.
Right. Yeah, I
We are cool
remember that.
teams, but different teams. And yeah, community chats are the live streams that we record here, that we invite other teams members, like in this case, Storybook. It was the case of Astro, and probably can be other teams in the community, let's say. So this is second edition. You can always find the recordings in the YouTube channel. And actually you can, yeah, the Astro one was already published in YouTube. Maybe Sid, who is in the background and is the mastermind behind the scenes, can share the link later. So you will be able to find this also maybe in a couple of days. I think it will be in YouTube, but also right here in Twitch afterwards. Good. I see. Yeah, in the chat you will see the link of the YouTube channel. Thank you very much. So, very quick about myself. I'm DevRel in Storyblok, developer relations for a year already. Maybe you know me from the Vue community. And I have two things in common with Alba, who will introduce herself in a minute, which is we are both in Alicante, from Alicante, but she's not in Alicante actually. And we both were ambassadors before joining Storyblok. And with a spoiler,
yeah.
Alba, you can continue.
Well, actually, I'm a DevRel engineer as Alex now, but before that, I was working as a front-end for 6 years and actually working with a Storyblok just for personal projects, my own website, building Jamstack sites because I really love it. But I was not using it professionally, and I decided to join the team because I really like the product, and I think it's a good choice.
And who do we have today with us, Alba?
Well, actually, we have a really important person, I will say. For me, it was like kind of, oh, I need to interview this guy. I mean, he can be the co-hoster today too. But actually, Varun is a UI developer specializing in component-driven development, design system, and generative art. That you need to explain us, Varun, what is that? Because no idea. When I read it, it's like, what he's doing. I mean, you are working in a lot of stuff more than your role in a storybook. And basically, he's a DX engineer at Chromatic and a contributor to Storybook. So yeah, you are working on everything we use nowadays as a design system creators. So yeah, you need to explain us more about that.
Yeah, thank you for having me here. Nice, really nice to be on the Storyblok community chats. Yeah, I would say Day job, definitely. I'm a developer experience engineer at Chromatic and Storybook, so I sort of help out on both sides of the community. Generative art is kind of how I started to learn code. I went to design school, and one of the things we learned was a tool called processing, which is you write code to create visuals. So usually like
Oh,
2D or 3D graphics. That's generative art. Essentially it's just creating visuals with code.
oh, that's really cool.
Sounds super cool. I'm very magic to my mind, honestly.
Maybe we choose a wrong topic today and we were need to build this kind of stuff. That would be cool to see it in a live stream actually.
Yeah, I can come back for that sometime.
Cool.
I have a question for you, Varun, because you mentioned Chromatic. What's the relation between Chromatic and Storybook, actually?
So Storybook itself is an open source project with a steering committee and a large community of contributors. And then Chromatic is a separate company that builds a bunch of tools around Storybook, primarily for testing components and for facilitating review of UIs. And Chromatic is founded by some of the contributors to Storybook, and a few of the core contributors to Storybook work at Chromatic. So Chromatic helps a lot in the Storybook community with updating and maintaining Storybook and sort of creating some of the learning resources around it.
Awesome. Sounds really good. So it's like Storybook is the open source project and will always stay open source. And Chromatic makes magic around Storybook and brings this to another level, especially, I guess, for medium, large project companies using design systems, right?
Yeah, all kinds of sizes, I would say. So, even for like small teams where you have less resources, you still have to build applications with lots of UI and you have to test it. So with Chromatic, you get a lot of sort of automation around that, and it just makes testing components easier. So yeah, it definitely benefits all levels of companies.
Awesome. You made me think about checking the Chromatic website. I haven't checked it so far, I have to say. But I know pretty well Storybook, and I can say that everyone is in love with that. Especially I have one of my friends that is very into design systems and is super in love with Storybook.
Yeah, I mean, I'm biased, but it's definitely an awesome tool.
Well, I think all of us are biased because, I never use another documentation slash testing properties for design systems. Never. Only a Storybook. I didn't know anyone before doing that, isn't it? There is other tools for that? Oh, there is. Okay. So we have
Yeah,
competitors.
yeah, for sure. I mean, I think the Storybook kind of is an interesting tool. Like, if I sort of like step back, the idea behind Storybook is UIs are now built using components, and normally you build those components within an application. But with Storybook, you can actually detach those components from the application and put it in this sandbox that Storybook gives you. So you can work on one component at a time. And with that, yeah, definitely there are sort of other alternatives to Storybook. But where Storybook is kind of unique is it then allows you to do generate documentation for your components and allows you to even test components within Storybook itself. So you can do visual testing, you can test component logic, you can run accessibility tests, and that's the part that's sort of unique. A lot of other tools are more focused on the playground side or the documentation side, and less on the what is the end-to-end life cycle of testing a component or building out a component.
Yeah, really cool, actually. And I was thinking, how did you start with a Storybook? How you end up working on this product and being in that team?
Yeah, I would say it's similar to what you two were describing, your relationship with Storyblok. So I've been a long-time user of Storybook. I previously worked in consulting, so got to work on a lot of projects, especially design system projects, where we needed some kind of tool to be able to build out those UI components. And my go-to choice was always Storybook. And just through that process, I got to meet Dominic, who's one of the co-founders of Chromatic, and realized there was sort of a new developer experience team spinning up, and might be a good sort of fit mutually. So that's how I ended up joining the Storybook DX team.
Oh, really cool, because actually our CEO is also called Dominic. I think that we have some problems with the naming in general.
we're making it even worse. So similar I mean, same name for founders, very similar logos, very similar wording. Yeah, both component based, let's say.
Yeah.
Do you know when when people said that there is a person in another country that seems like you, but this is the same with companies. We have like our counter company in another place. Really funny.
Yeah. It's like first love, right? Like we in Spain say a flechazo. I'm not sure how to say that in English, but
A first sight love. No, I just
Oh,
say
love at first sight
invented that
kind of
word.
thing.
Ah, is that? Oh, I say it girly. Yeah, I think I'm seeing a lot of TV shows about love these days. Yeah, it's Christmas.
great, great. So I was thinking because in a Storyblok, let's say we are also component based. We call it also blocks, but at the end, every block or every component that you create in a Storyblok, you map it to a component in your front end. So it plays very well with Vue, React as well, and any component-based technologies. It's also like the same case of Storybook that is kind of exclusive to components and adapted to these component-based technologies, or it can be used also like, let's say, in plain JavaScript and HTML or other cases.
Yeah, I mean, Storybook kind of came out of the React community, so it's definitely very much focused on components. But Storybook now sort of works with sort of most of the popular JavaScript frameworks, so React, Angular, Vue, but also web components. So if you are using vanilla HTML or JavaScript, there is an option to use that in Storybook too. In that case, it's just there's no idea. There's no sort of component naturally. You kind of have to define what a component is. If you're using web components, then that's the natural thing. But in other cases, if you're just using vanilla HTML, JavaScript, there's no idea of components necessarily, but you can still have those templates within the Storybook and you can still break up the UI.
Sounds great. I had to say I'm very excited to see how is the integration between Storyblok and Storybook, because if they both are component based, something tells me, yeah, it doesn't have to be very, how to say, very hard. It has to be smooth.
It was, I would say, yeah, I've tried to integrate other CMS, headless CMSs with Storybook in the past, and the component model definitely worked really well, where I could just map blocks in Storyblocks to components in my Storybook code base, and just kind of everything worked really smoothly. So yeah, excited to get into that.
Awesome. You're gonna keep us waiting a lot to see that, right? Or not?
Sorry, I missed that.
Are you gonna make us wait a lot to see that working, or?
No, we're good to go. I think I can.
Yeah, we can start the screen. Maybe Sid
Screen sharing.
or Man in the Shadow. Yeah. Cool.
All right, awesome. So maybe I can start with a little bit of a sort of introduction to Storybook itself. So if folks in your community haven't encountered Storybook before, and I'll share this example here. This was created by my teammate Jan that you mentioned earlier. And it's a little demo application that he built for a course to teach folks about Storybook. And the application is a lot like sort of Uber Eats or any sort of food delivery application that you might have used. So everything that you see here is components, right? Like you break up the UI into these blocks. These are all components. And I mentioned earlier, like normally, let's say if you were building out this little card component here, you would build it in the application. But then the tricky part is this card can have multiple variations. Like for example, this restaurant is closed, so the card, those are at least two different states for this card. If a new restaurant is added to the system, that's another variation. When I sort of refresh the page, there's this loading state that appears. So those are all different variations of the same component. So when you're working on that component, you have to go through and test all of those variations. And you might not have data for that in a live application or in the local database that you have all the time. So you sort of kind of have to manually replicate those states. You go in, add, is loading prop equals true in one case, and then test that, and is new restaurant set to true, and you test that. And then once you're done, you sort of delete all of that temporary code and next time you come back to the component, you have to do all of that stuff over again. And that's the part that Storybook focuses on improving as an experience. So instead of having to build this component within the application, the idea is, why don't we just take this out and move it into a sandbox environment? So this is the Storybook for this meal drop application. And that one sort of card that I was talking about is called the restaurant card. So here we have the restaurant card, and you'll notice that it has 4 stories on the left-hand side. So the default state for this card, when it's a new restaurant, when it's closed, and when it's loading. Plus, there are two sort of variants to this. It can be in dark mode, or it can be in light mode. So you can switch between those two in Storybook 2. That part is configurable. You can switch sort of which theme is active. Or another sort of cool feature is you can render them side by side. So now both light and dark variants you can view at the same time. And that's sort of the core idea of Storybook, is you have these stories that capture different states or variants of a component. And then while you're working on that component, you don't have to replicate all of those cases again and again. You can just come and sort of cycle through the states and make sure that things are looking correct or not. And then there's sort of other things you can do on top of that. For example, in this case, I'm using the designs add-on and embedding the Figma file that shows the designs for this component right next to it here. Just gonna refresh the page to get it to load. There you go. So on the right-hand side is the live Figma file. I can actually click on the UI to inspect it and see what the design looks like.
Really cool.
And then on the left is the code. And then I'll show one more example. One more sort of cool feature is testing in Storybook. So let me get to this example. So this is on one of the pages, and I'll switch to just sort of the dark mode. So what's happening here is you can, on this sort of restaurant page, you can click on an item and you can add it to the cart. So that's a logic behavior you would normally want to test in your application. So you would write a test using testing library or Jest or one of the other sort of testing tools. So that workflow is also built into Storybook. We actually offer a Storybook interaction testing, which is under the hood, it's using Jest and testing library. It's just versions of them that are instrumented to work in the browser and in Storybook. And what happens is if I refresh this, this is the test that's running on the right-hand side, and Storybook will actually visualize each step written within the test. So we're finding a particular DOM node that has this cheeseburger title in it, clicking on it, and then expecting that this modal pops open. So this is writing both interactions and assertions. So Storybook will verify that that test is completing or not. And then also visually, you can see whether it's in that state or not. And then similarly, there is accessibility testing sort of built in. So the accessibility add-on uses Axe to run accessibility checks on this page. So it's not testing for everything possible as far as accessibility is concerned, but the common issues, and Axe is sort of the go-to tool for that. So you get to have that built in too.
And actually, I was wondering all these add-ons, because in the past I used the accessibility one. I never saw the design one. Maybe it's new, let's say, in comparison with the accessibility one. But I was wondering, is part of the chromatic team to work on this kind of add-ons, or is more a community like the modules in the Next ecosystem, for example?
Yeah, so definitely the community. So if you go to the Storybook website, you'll see this under the integrations section. These are all of the add-ons that are available, and there's something like 400 add-ons that are available. And it's a mix. So some of these are maintained by the Storybook team that you can see here. Others are maintained by verified community members or sort of community partners. So for example, Zeppelin has an add-on and that's sort of maintained by the Zeppelin team.
Oh, cool.
And then there's hundreds of other add-ons that are just maintained by the community. So the designs add-on is actually maintained by the community. It allows you to embed Figma files or Figma spec files into Storybook. And similarly, there are add-ons for Zeppelin or Envision DSM if you use one of the other tools, or Adobe XD if you want to use those tools to for your designs.
Really cool. Really cool.
I'm impressed because it's been really like 2-3 years since I haven't used a storybook again, and it changed, wow, a lot, really a lot. I'm particularly excited about the accessibility plugin. We have a colleague in our team, Josephine, who is very into accessibility, and I think she's been having like at least 4 or 5 talks this year about accessibility worldwide. So I'm pretty sure she would fall in love with the product just by that. Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah, so that's kind of the basics of Storybook. Before I dive into the integration part, any questions from you all so far?
I have one curiosity, the Figma integration. Is it a real connection? Like, for example, if you change the design in Figma, it will change the generated HTML or something like that? Yeah.
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. So let me go back to the designs add-on for this one. So on the right is a live Figma file. So it's using Figma embeds to embed this file here. So if the designers are working with, they update the file, you would get the latest version here. They have to publish it, or they have to publish an update depending on sort of what version control that you're using within Figma. And then you would get that. And that's the whole benefit of this is normally if you just get images or PDF for design specs, when those design specs update, you have to go and get the new one and make sure that you're using the right one. With this, it is updated. And then the other cool thing is you can choose what part of the designs are linked here. So let me switch to the actually for the code for this project. So let me just pop that open. So this is what the stories file looks like. So this is for that restaurant card component. At the very top, you have a little bit of metadata that describes, what is the title of this? How should we show this up in Storybook? So under the components folder, I want to show restaurant card, and I'm writing stories for the restaurant card component. And then along with that, you can specify parameters, and this is to configure add-ons within Storybook or Storybook features. So here we have a parameter for the fix spec for the design add-on, and you can link to a specific node within your Figma files. In this case, it is linking to just the restaurant card node. So you're only seeing the designs for that particular node, and that way you can control sort of which designs appear. So if I switch back to this and go to one of the other things that has let's see if any of the other ones have a design. Yeah, the batch has a design. So in this case, you'll see that it links to the specific node for the batch component. So that's where the link happens. There is another side to this, which is there is a plugin for Figma for Storybook. So in this case, you're embedding designs inside Storybook, but you can also embed stories inside Figma, so designers can see what the live components look like, and that's a really cool integration too. So I can quickly show sort of what that looks like. Actually, just go into the docs here. So here's what it looks like. You click a component in Figma, and it will sort of show what the story is right next to it. And this is again live rendered story because Storybook just runs in the browser, so it's just an iframe that's rendering the story. In this case, you do have to publish your Storybook, so you can use Storybook locally, but you can also publish your Storybook as a website. So in this case, you do have to publish it, and then you publish it through Chromatic, and then Chromatic will manage the authentication. So if you have a private Storybook, your users have to log in order to access that. So it's not just publicly available. So that's the other side of the Figma integration.
Amazing. I have a friend who will love this. I will send him the recording for sure afterwards.
Actually, I was thinking there is kind of a recursivity. If I'm in a Storybook and I click on the component in Figma, I can open the Storybook add-on too.
If you are in Figma and good
If
question.
you're in a Storybook,
right,
taking the node.
So I've never tried that. I'm not sure. I think the embed limits sort of which add-ons are visible in the embed. So it's a
Yeah, maybe
sort of
don't
a
have the
specific
extensions.
iframe, so it probably doesn't have the design add-on. But I've never tried that cyclical thing.
But it would be really funny to see the recursiveness of the plugins.
Yeah.
Really cool stuff, actually. Because I think I was working with a Storybook like 2 years ago, and I already see a lot of things that have changed too.
Mhm.
So yeah, it's like growing really fast.
Yeah,
Impressive.
definitely.
I remember trying to make everything for web components with the React documentation only, and that was like a nightmare, of course, because
Right.
it was nothing to be with the other. Yeah, but now
Yeah,
documentation
no.
is pretty well done. Yeah, yeah,
Exactly.
crazy.
You can go through, you can
My
choose
God,
sort
the
of which
Svelte is
framework you're
there too.
using.
Okay,
Yeah,
yeah,
Svelte is there too. Yeah, sure.
really fast.
Cool. So that's kind of the gist of it. So jumping into the integration side. So Storybook is used for design systems quite a lot. A lot of application developers use it too. So you don't have to just use the component, that sort of story model if you're just building design systems. It works similarly for application components too. But for this integration today, I'll focus on the design system side of things because that's where I just found that the fit from Storyblok and Storybook was just kind of perfect. So what I did was we have this tutorial that shows you how to use design system Storybook to build out a design system documentation site. So I've taken the code sample for this project. So if you are curious, you can sort of walk through that. But I've taken that and then I've combined that with Storyblok. So this is what the storybook looks like for this project. Through this workflow, you build out a few components: the avatar component, the badge component, the button component, and icon and links. So like I said, one common use case for Storybook is to use Storybook for documenting design systems. So uh, the core sort of add-on that enables this is the Storybook Docs add-on. And what that allows you to do is when you write stories for these components, so I'll switch to, let's say, the avatar component. So we have a few stories. We have a story that just has the standard sort of avatar where we pass in args. So args are the mechanism that you use to pass in props into a component. So if you're using React, this maps to props. If you use Vue, this maps to inputs. Same thing with Angular. So args are sort of Storybook's generic term for things that go into a component. So we have a story that just says render a large avatar with this username, and this is the avatar image URL. And then similarly, we have another story for different sizes. When we don't have an image, it will render initials and then the loading state. So we have all of these different stories here: standard, sizes, initials, and loading. So what the Docs add-on does is it takes all of those stories and combines them to generate this documentation page. At the very least, you will get this sort of primary story, and then it visualizes the props of that component as an args table. So if you use TypeScript or docgen comments, it will parse that data to generate this table. And this is interactive, so you can sort of play with the component and see whether it's change what happens if I change one of the props. And then all of the other stories are rendered below, and these are live stories too, so you can play with it and break it, obviously. Oh, sorry, it's because I don't have the Storybook running locally. So let me start that actually. So normally you can just run yarn Storybook to start up Storybook, but today I'm going to do something slightly different, which is to run it with HTTPS, and that's because of Storyblok, so that we can then preview in Storyblok. So Storybook does give you an HTTPS mode. You just have to supply your own certificate. So I followed the nice tutorial that you have in the Storyblok documentation to generate that certificate. Worked great. Put it in, and it works.
Happy to
So
hear that.
yeah, no, that was fantastic, and just worked really nicely. So I'm going to start up the Storybook, which will then get this going once again. So I do that avatar component. So yeah, like I said, these are live coded story examples too. So you can play with them, or you can copy the code. So instead of images, this is rendering your components live. So it makes for a much richer documentation. And then you can add custom content here, just typing it out in the stories file or in an MDX file. So that's the other cool thing is you can just have standalone pages that are not connected to any component, and these pages are built using MDX, which is Markdown with some React components inside it. So I'll share an example of what that looks like. Let me switch to the...
Actually, Varun, my friend Join, is the one saying Alicante Power. So he's very cool. He's architecting New Relic and very into the design systems, PIMA, everything.
Oh,
so
awesome.
We have good
Awesome.
audience today.
Nice to have you here. So yeah, this is the intro MDX file. So you'll notice that mostly just writing Markdown, but then also importing some utilities that the Storybook Docs add-on gives you to add metadata, or if you want to drop in a story in here or drop in a title or subtitle, that is all available to you here too. So that's what the normal workflow looks like. But now a common issue that comes up a lot is Storybook is built for developers primarily. So this is great if everyone is comfortable jumping into a code editor and editing Markdown files, right? Or same thing for your component stories. If you're comfortable coming in here and editing, the text is in Markdown, but then there's a bunch of sort of React components in there too. A lot of teams are not able to do that. There might be folks on the team who are not comfortable editing code, not comfortable with the Git workflow. And that's where a request we get is, can I put that content in a CMS? And the Storybook just pulls that for us. And that's the integration I want to show you all today, where we will move all of this content from Storybook into Storyblok, and then have that rendered dynamically through the Storyblok API. So let me switch back to that branch again. And this is where the component-based model just worked beautifully between the two sides. So maybe I'll start with the Storyblok side of things. So I set up a little project here. And you can see I have content for the intro page, the color palette page, and then a few of the components. And the way this is set up is I created a few blocks. So I created, let's start with the docs page block. So this is a block that allows me to create content that will go inside that Markdown page. So whatever you want to put in here, it will just be rendered on the Markdown page. And it really just has one field, which is the rich text body field. So if you come in here and put some content, that's just going to go and get rendered in Storybook itself. So one of the examples of this is the intro component. And you can see on the right-hand side is the component, and on the left-hand side is the Storybook preview. So this is where the HTTPS thing comes in handy, because then I can preview it in the Storyblok UI. So this is previewing stuff that's running locally on my computer at localhost 6006. And then on the right-hand side is the content for that particular page. So you'll see I have some image in here, Markdown, and code samples. And then you'll notice that there is this fancy code component that renders code with the correct formatting and things like that. And that is a nested field that I created. And then, yeah, like if I modify something here, save it, it should refresh, and you see that the content updates. So that's all wired up nicely. Let's get into talking about sort of how that happens. So in Storybook, the idea is there is Storybook UI. So that's the stuff around here that you see. And then the sort of this white panel that you see is the canvas that renders your components, your code, and your documentation. So we can configure sort of how things are being rendered inside here. So if I switch back to my my Storybook code, I'll start by talking a little bit about the different things I had to do. So one thing I did have to do was make sure that I'm using Webpack 5 with Storybook. That's because the Storyblok libraries are built to be used as ES modules. So that works in Webpack 5, so I had to make sure that I was using Webpack 5.
Okay.
Which is fine, works great. In fact, it's going to be default starting in the next version of Storybook, so just have to enable that. And then there is another sort of configuration file for Storybook called preview.js. So this is where you're configuring things that are going to run inside the preview pane, the canvas pane that renders your code. So here I'm importing the Storybook init functions from Storyblok React and setting that up and running that to enable Storyblok inside my project. So nothing fancy, just passing in the access token and the API plugin to get things going. And then all of the magic will happen in other components that are sort of wired up to Storybook itself. Any questions so far? Any concerns about things I've done?
No, actually, I just want to point out that it seems that you are a UI developer because you have like the icons inside the block library of a Storyblok. You select each icon to identify the block, and that is so cool. I mean, I love that you are using that.
Thank you. Thank you.
I have one question actually, Varun, but also I want to
Yep.
encourage anyone in the chat to ask any questions you have. We can put it in the screen and we can Varun can answer it in the meanwhile.
Oh, that's true.
You mentioned that you enable Webpack 5 as Bit is becoming like a web standard. Is it also Storybook working with Bit?
Yeah, absolutely. So you'll notice that this thing says core builder. So you can choose between Webpack 4, Webpack 5, or Beat. So depending on what your project is set up with. In this case, this project was set up with Webpack. So I'm just using that because it's using Create React App, which uses Webpack under the hood. But yeah, if you're using Beat, Storybook has first-class support for Beat too.
Very cool. Yeah.
Cool. All right. So the way this sort of the magic happens in MDX is you can just import any component that you want. So normally you would have Markdown here where I can say, this is my design system, whatever you want to type in, and that will get rendered. But you can also just import any other component that you want. So what I did was I created this docs page component. So that maps to the docs page that I showed in Storyblok. And I just created a Storyblok directory in my project, and that's where this docs page component lives. And it's relatively straightforward, I want to say. So this library was another one that I found in the Storyblok documentation, the Storyblok rich text React renderer. A bit of a mouthful, but essentially what it lets you do is it lets you render rich text in React without having to do the dangerously set inner HTML thing that you have to do otherwise. So all I really have to do is just pass in the body content into this render function and then render that in my application. And then, of course, I'm using the use Storyblok hook to fetch the data for that particular for a particular story. So this docs page component takes in ID as one of the props, and then that ID gets used to fetch content. So if I switch back to the intro page, you'll notice that it is using design system introduction as the ID, which is the content ID or the slug that I set in Storyblok. So that fetches the data and then renders the data here. Relatively straightforward. And then you'll also notice that there's this resolvers thing in here. So if I was just rendering regular rich text, I probably don't need this. It would just render all of this HTML as is. But then this part where I'm trying to use the component inside my Storybook that renders code samples with syntax highlighting, I wanted to map that to a specific component, and that's where resolvers comes in. So I created a resolvers file, which this is the pattern that the rich text renderer library uses. It allows you to specify block resolvers. So these are mapping to specific components that live in React. So I have a component for code here, for example. It receives source and language as two of the fields from Storyblok. And then I just map that into the highlight component that I have in my code base. So going to jump back into Storyblok for a second. Let's go check out that code component. So you can see it has the source and language as the the to field. The source is where you just put in your code source, and language allows you to switch between, JavaScript, TypeScript, whatever other language that you might be using to render the code snippet. And yeah, that's just maps here. Similarly, I have a couple of other components that I mapped to a code snippet component, which is slightly more complex than code highlighting. It allows you to have multiple code snippets. So you can have a thing you'll notice in the Storybook documentation is you can switch between React and Vue and Angular. So that's where we use this a lot, where you can switch between different variations of the same code snippet. So that's what's happening here. And this is using nested components, in fact. So there's a snippets component, and then there's a snippet component inside it. So I'll show sort of how that's set up inside Storybook in Storyblok 2. And then lastly, there's a color palette component, which if you're building a design system, you want to be able to display what colors you use in your application or in your design token. So the color palette component allows you to render that. So again, that's been set up. So let's look at those two components. This was pretty cool, where the nested idea works really, really well. So the code snippet component has snippets as a block, as sort of nested fields, and the snippets component has label, source, and language again. Similarly, there's the color palette component, which just has nested colors blocks, and the color item allows you to specify title, subtitle, and the actual sort of hex value of the color. I set that up as a multi-option because I know all of the design tokens in my design system, so I just pre-fed them in here. So when I go to build a page, I can pick and choose which ones to use there. I know that was a lot. Again, I'll pause if there's any questions.
Who starts?
Right. I think where this might be useful is let's go actually check it out in a live example. So this is the color palette page. Again, you'll see the Storybook rendering on the left-hand side and the content on the right-hand side. So up top is just a regular markdown because this is rendering the entire page. So some text, some more text. The title of the page just comes from our markdown file itself, but the text is being pulled in from the design from the CMS. And then this is the color palette component. So you'll notice that I have a bunch of color items in here. I can choose set the title. That's the title you see here. The subtitle shows up here, and this is the actual color. And then the component in React uses that color to render the actual sort of chip that you see here. So let's go ahead and add another one in here. Let's say go for tertiary. I actually don't know what the shade for this is. I think it's gray. Let's see. Save. Refresh, and hey, yeah, not bad. Yeah, gray it is. So that's the tertiary color that showed up here.
Okay.
So yeah, the component model you can see just maps super nicely, right? Because there's the color palette component that renders all of these colors, and then this color item component is just mapping to the specific items inside the color palette.
It's amazing. I mean, when I
Awesome.
saw how you create your own dynamic page in a Storybook project, because of course in Next or in any React library, you see that they already have like a pages folder or something to create your own pages dynamically. But you create
Right.
your own component docs page and send the ID per history, so you can. That was amazing. I mean.
Yeah, so this is the setup to where you are just building out the entire page. But of course, for these components, Storybook builds that page for you. So you have the two options. You can either build out this entire page in MDX or just write stories, and then Storybook will auto-generate this page for you. So in this case, it was a slightly different setup. So if I go into the avatar stories component, what you'll notice is I don't have an MDX file. I just have a stories.js file. But you can customize the content of the docs page by using parameters again. So parameters, docs, and then the page property. And then this can just return any kind of React component, which will be then used to render the documentation page. So by default, Storybook just does this for you. You don't have to set anything up here. But in this case, we don't want Storybook to do that automatically. We actually want to pull that content from the CMS again. So that's what this component docs page does. So similar idea to the docs page, but in this case, it is documentation page for a specific component. So let me open up that page. So this one is a little bit more complex. So the other page was just straight up, just render the body and that's it. But in this case, because it is documentation for a component, Storybook gives you some extra stuff. So it will render the primary story, it will render the arcs table, and it will render all of the other stories. So we want to bring that along, that Storybook will handle for us. And then everything above that is content that's coming from the CMS. So we have the body content, but I also set up a couple more fields to add a title to the page and a subtitle to the page. And then the body content is exactly the same as the docs page. So using the same resolvers. In those resolvers, along with block resolvers, I also have a couple of other things that the text renderer library lets you do, which is choosing what components render different HTML elements. So you can map heading elements or code blocks or paragraphs, UL, images to custom components that you might have. And this is where it really sort of depends on how you want to do it. I mapped each one to a specific component. You might just have a component that adds styling to the page and then just use that one component to wrap up your rendered body, and that's it. The reason I did this was because Storybook does have a bunch of sort of default styling for HTML components from the Storybook components library. That's what we use internally inside the Storybook UI. And that maps to all of these things. So I just set that up to map it up. You'll notice that there's this extra resolver function, and that's just because this text React renderer library changes the way it gets data. So normally for a React component, you just have props that includes children, and you can just pass that into an element. But in this case, it splits children and props into two different arguments into the function. So I just wrote this little utility function that allows you to put that into whatever element that you want to put into and render that in React. So that's what this resolver function is doing.
My God, really cool. You are amazing, Varun.
Yeah, something I really like is that I can see now the matching of the component-based approaches. So basically, it's about, in a Storyblok, you will create the data structure of those components. And in a Storybook, you will create also the stories of those components using those arguments that will map later to the React properties or the Vue inputs, right? And at the end, you connect them together. And I see like there is a nice combo of things automated, like those pages automatically generated. But on top of that, you have flexibility on adding your custom stuff to the documentation, to the interactive things in Storyblok, correct?
Right. Yeah, no, that's the part that I really like too, that it just maps one-to-one all the way down. It's not just there's a page component and then I have to do all the magic on the code side. It's just mapping all the way down to really nested components too.
It's super cool. I love it.
Yeah, really
Right,
cool.
cool. So in this case, we just use that component docs page component, and then again, just pass in an ID for whatever content that you have in Storyblok, and it will pull that content and render it. So let me show you what that looks like in Storyblok. So let's go to the avatar component. So again, you'll notice that there's a bunch of text. So this is the rich text body that is being rendered up top. And then the rest that you see, these were the Storybook components that I already had on the code side, so that's being pulled in, and then the title is used up here, and the subtitle is used right here. So we can bring that around, and it updates. So that's the basic version. Let's look at another one which has nested components inside it. So for the link component, or is it like, no, actually it was for the icon component. So in this case, we have the sort of rich text up here. But again, I have a nested component. So I mentioned that code snippets component previously, where you have 2 snippets. So you can use this icon component in 2 ways, when it's decorative and when it's non-decorative. So it's perfect use case for having the multiple code snippets. So again, it's just nested properties all the way. So you can choose a label, you can choose what the source code is, have 2 snippets inside here, and that's what's rendered on the left here. And this is an interactive component, get the nice sort of copy feature, all of that goodness that's in code, but it maps beautifully to the content that lives in Storyblok.
Amazing.
Yeah, super great. And it looks very fancy, those code snippets.
Yeah, I think that is kind of it for the integration side of things. It's just, yeah, in this case, I built a couple of components that render the Storyblok content, and then just use it to replace the docs page. Either you can pull that into an MDX file or just use the parameters to completely override the docs page itself. And yeah, it works in both cases.
Yeah, and actually, I was thinking because I see a lot of people asking always how to mock the data of the components you can create in a Storyblok inside the Storybook histories. And in this case, for example, the histories are just naming the code. So I guess that all this data that says mobile, watch, all these icons are provided in the code itself, not via Storyblok. But
Yeah.
maybe it's possible, isn't it? Like to create all the stories data inside the Storyblok too.
Yeah, totally. So that's what we did with the color palette component, right? Because in this
Okay, that
case,
one. True.
yeah, all of these chips, they live in Storyblok. So yeah, you can pick and choose how much lives in the content side and how much lives in the code side.
That's amazing.
Yeah, it's super cool. I just have one question, Varun, because I can imagine that for some people, including myself, it was like a ton of information and everything
Yes,
like
yes.
connecting together. Can we find the source code of this product that you built somewhere that we can try ourselves?
Absolutely. So let me drop a link to this. So I have a specific branch for this. So I will share a link to this in chat.
Awesome.
Nice.
And I do plan to turn this into a little tutorial article, and I'll follow up with that in the coming months. No guarantees on when it's going to
No
happen.
pressure.
Yeah, but hope to write that out.
It will be our Christmas present, probably, if we are lucky, right? Nice. Thank you very much, Varun. It was very detailed, very complete. I just had, yeah, I don't know what to say other than congrats. It was really good work. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank
You so much.
Thank you for building this product that is component driven too. So just works perfect for both sides.
Same to you.
Awesome. Yeah, we are super on time because we planned these streams to be 1 hour. We have just 2 minutes left, so maybe the audience could have any questions. If any of you now you have questions, now is your time. It's your last chance.
Yeah. And if not, just to summarize, Varun, what do you think about the Storyblok, like the feature that you will highlight that we have that other helpless CMS that you used didn't have, or did you feel that we have something better, let's say?
I would say the block-based editing works really well, where it's like this is a perfect example where I can sort of mix text and blocks inside the same field, or have multiple blocks as fields. That works really, really well. In other CMSs that I've seen where they do have this idea of nested blocks, even, it's just you have a form and then another form and then another form, and it becomes really hard to figure out sort of where am I editing the content. Whereas with Storyblok, all of that stuff is just in that one field, and it maps perfectly to what you're seeing on the screen, and it just makes it easier to sort of compare the two.
Oh, that's amazing. And one thing that you will improve? Constructive feedback, please.
That's a good question. I feel like I haven't spent enough time yet with Storyblok to have complaints. I'm still in the this is great. I'm loving it phase. So when I encounter those issues, I'll definitely let you all know.
Thank you so much.
Varun, before finishing, any resources that you want to share about Storybook that people may be interested into?
Yeah, I'll call out this tutorial again. So you can find this at storybookjs.org/tutorials. We actually have a bunch of tutorials for everything from if you're using Storybook for the first time to using Storybook for all kinds of testing. But the example I shared today used the design systems for developers version. So if you're curious about how do I use Storybook to build design systems, that's a perfect place to start. And then the code sample that I shared is just adding on top of this to replace the content that's in Markdown and Stories file with stuff that's in Storyblok.
Awesome. It's super beautiful, the place. I love it. And the page, sorry. I love it.
Yeah, the designs are amazing.
Yeah. Great. So just one more announcement from our side. For those who have liked this live chat, next week we also have the Girl Code break time. I think you participated in some, Alba, already, or?
Yeah, in the last one. Yeah, in the third, we were talking about your own branding, and this time they are talking about growing as a developer. So I think a really nice topic, actually.
Awesome. That will happen next week, 29th November, 4 p.m. CST. You can register on the link that you see in the screen. Will you be there, Alba, or who will be?
No, I don't think so. But I don't know who will be, actually.
Surprise. Let's see.
Surprise, yeah.
A Storyblok people for sure. Good. So I think we can wrap up with this. Thank you very much, Varun. It was really smooth. It was really a pleasure to have you here. Yeah, hope to collaborate together at any point. So anytime you have questions about Storyblok, or you want to have us in your, I don't know what you run in the Storybook or Chromatic, yeah, we will be happy to do that.
Yeah,
awesome.
For sure.
Thank you again.
Awesome. So, do you want to wrap up with something else, Alba, or should we finish?
No, I think that's it. Just give a like when this video is on YouTube, subscribe to the channel, follow the channel in Twitch. I mean, there is a lot of things you can do to, to join the community.
Ring the bell and all that stuff.
Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you very much, everyone, for joining. Have a nice day.
Thank you. Bye.